And so we're going to start
Can
with
I have a
Daoism.
question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So you haven't released next.
So I'm going to start with sharing my screen and showing you something that many of you may be familiar with. We will see. Do we know this symbol? Can someone tell me what it is if you know it?
Yin and yang.
Yin and yang, great.
It's a yin yang.
Yes, it is. So yin and yang is a symbol of Daoism. Does anyone know what this symbol is supposed to represent? And don't just tell me like a word, or I want you to try, like, what does it mean? How would you apply it if you were someone who believed in Daoism? What might it represent for your life or your beliefs? Because yesterday, when I asked this question, the first person said, light and darkness, darkness and light. Yes, we can literally see there's a black dot and a white part and a white dot and a black part. Yes, but what might that mean, do you think?
Does it, like, represent balance?
Okay, never mind.
Balance in what? What do you mean by that?
Evil and good.
Okay, I appreciate
the balance of good and evil.
Good, they're balancing good and evil. Okay, so let's think of like one of the worst people we can think of. A lot of people would say like Hitler. Adolf Hitler is a horrible dictator who killed millions of people, and he's just one of the worst humans who've ever lived. I think we can all agree that's a fair statement. All right? But according to Taoist belief, even Hitler, horrible, horrible, awful, 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 had at least something nice about him, or he did something to help someone, or he had some positive character trait. Now, when we hear that, a lot of us go, oh boy, and you're right, that is uncomfortable. Absolutely. The other side of that would be on the best day of your life, whatever that may be, something happened that wasn't quite perfect. All right. Now, the point of this is not to try to redeem dictators. No one's trying to say Hitler's a good guy, because he clearly was not. Okay. But the point is that there's always something positive in something bad. There's always something that's not perfect in something that's great. So there is this balance and harmony in life. So if today is a bad day and you're just not feeling it and it's a rough day for you, should you get too upset about it according to Taoism? Why not? Because what does that mean probably is going to happen tomorrow?
Gonna be a good day.
Yeah, it'll be better. Absolutely. Or if this is a bad week, next week will be better, or bad 6 months, or a bad year. I don't think any one of us are going to look back someday and go, 2020, those were the days. I don't think that's going to happen. But something good has happened to you in the last 6 months. Maybe you've forged a closer relationship with someone in your household. Maybe you've dedicated yourself more to reading. Maybe you've gotten outside more, and that's been good for you. Who knows? And maybe you're like, I don't really know. And to be honest, ordinarily I'd be like, now come on, you can find something good. If you're like 2020 sucked really bad, I don't see a whole lot good about it, I'm not going to argue with you. But a Taoist would say, look, that just means 2021 or 2022 is going to be awesome. And that's the way they look at it. You might go, oh, that's naive or that's silly. And that's completely fair for you to say, but that is the perspective a person who believes in this philosophy would hold. Okay? And again, I say philosophy, not to denigrate the religion or to say it's not a religion or anything, but in my opinion, and in many scholars' opinions, that religions try to talk about afterlife and your purpose, and Taoism doesn't do that. Taoism does not talk about your soul or what happens when you die. Taoism is just about how to live your life best here. And the way to live your life best here is to just try to be in harmony with others, be in harmony with nature, to not to try to overdo things, and just to try to be the best person you can be. And so that's basically what Taoism is. All right, so we're gonna discuss a couple terms briefly. Again, Chinese, as you probably know, has a completely different alphabet than Western languages. So you might see Taoism with a D or with a T. It's the same thing. Technically, instead of translating from English to Chinese, you are transliterating, which means that they have sounds that we don't have and vice versa. So you will often see the same word spelled multiple different ways. It's still the same word. Okay? And without getting into too much linguistics that I can't explain adequately, that's just how that is. That's also, you'll see that with Arabic because it has a completely different alphabet. You'll see that with Hebrew. You'll see that with Russian. Any completely different alphabet, there's going to be sounds that language has that your language doesn't, and vice versa. So sometimes you'll see the same word spelled multiple ways. That's not bad spelling, that's just the way it is, because they don't have that sound in their native language, and so there's some variety in how you can spell it, if that makes any sense. So Taoism literally means the way. Tao is the way. And what is the way? Well, it's the way of living your life. It's the way to feel confident. It's the way to feel happy. It's the way to have a good, positive life, whatever that may mean for you. All right. It has a founder, a guy named Lao Tzu. I don't care if you know that, but Lao Tzu lives the same time as Confucius and the same time as Buddha. So all these religions and philosophies are coming out around the same time, which is kind of interesting, which is about 2,500 years ago. So there's no evidence that any of those three knew each other, that they corresponded, that they had any sort of relationship, because that would be pretty interesting if they did, but there's no evidence that ever occurred. Confucius, Lao Tzu, just like Confucius, is living in a time of war in China, chaos, fighting, all sorts of bad stuff. So it makes sense that, again, he's going to promote harmony, peacefulness, etc. So Taoists don't really care about like the government. A Taoist would say like, you live your life in harmony, you do the best you can do to be a good person. That's going to help society be better. It doesn't really matter about the government. Okay, that's an interesting philosophy, but that's kind of the way it is. So one way people often describe this is to go with the flow. Just kind of let it ride, not get too upset, not get too hype, just kind of be chill about everything. It kind of sounds like, if you know what the word hippie means from like the 1960s or 70s, kind of sounds like a hippie, like, hey man, it's going to be cool. Like, don't freak out. Like, yeah. And that's pretty accurate. Okay. I'll give you an example. Taoists will talk about like a rock falling into like a creek or a waterbed. Okay. Or, you know, like not a big river, but enough where the rock is big enough it'll stick out of the water. Now, of course, we're personifying here, but the water keeps flowing, and the water keeps flowing. The water doesn't change what it does. It keeps flowing against this rock, and many of you that understand this, what will eventually happen to the rock in that scenario?
It will erode.
Yeah, it'll disappear eventually. It may take 1,000 years, but that water will eventually erode the rock, and then the water will go back to doing exactly what it was before. A Taoist tries to be like that water. You just keep on flowing. You just keep on doing your thing. You don't get too upset. And if today's a bad day, tomorrow will be better. If 2020 is awful, 2021 will be better. That's the Taoist philosophy. That may not always be true, but that's the way they choose to look at life. And so that is a pretty interesting philosophy. Now, here's another interesting thing about Taoism. You are looking for your way, your path, what makes you happy. There are limits on that. Okay? That doesn't mean that I can do whatever I want to be happy. No. I got to live in harmony with others. So in my opinion, this is kind of similar to our First Amendment. Now, I know as, you know, people living in America, all of you know the 5 rights guaranteed in the First Amendment because we all know our rights at all times. Of course. Can anyone tell me one of those rights that are given in the American First Amendment?
Right to peacefully assemble.
Assemble. We've certainly seen that quite often this summer. Yes. All right. Peaceful assembly. Correct. What else? Somebody else? Oh, come on.
The right to bear arms.
That is the Second Amendment. Tank tops are Second Amendment, not the First. Okay. Again, terrible jokes. All right. Anybody? Did anyone go to 8th grade? Did this happen?
Freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech. Thank you. All right. How about another one?
Freedom of religion.
Yes, freedom of and from religion. Correct, Isabel. I appreciate it, but somebody else. If nobody else answers, we'll just sit here and stare at each other for a while. There's one other one that's pretty easy. The last one is a little funky, and I'll give you that one. But there's one more that's pretty easy that we're missing. So we've had assembly, speech, and religion.
Freedom of press.
Freedom of the press. Thank you, Drew. Well done. And then lastly is the one of petition. You should be able to ask your government to consider changing rules, laws, etc. So freedom of speech is probably the most prominent of those. A lot of people misunderstand that. You see someone get fired because they posted something racist on social media. And they're like, that's against freedom of speech. Freedom of speech, just so we're clear, is the government cannot punish you for saying what you want to say. If your employer decides they don't want to be associated with a racist, then they can fire you. So number one, don't say racist things because it's bad, but also don't say racist things because you might lose your job. And frankly, the First Amendment doesn't protect you from that. I'm amazed by how many adults, people that I respect, every time something like that happens and somebody does something really dumb and they get outed and they get fired, they're like, they can't do that. It's freedom of speech. Actually, Private businesses can do whatever they want to. That's why they're private. They have to follow certain laws, but if they don't want someone working for them that has opinions that they feel are just bad for their business, then they can not hire you. That's how that works. So as always, be mindful of what you say, be mindful of what you put on social media, because as someone told me years ago, the internet is forever. You may think you got rid of it, but somebody might find it, and that's not good. So just, before you post that, think, is this something that's valuable? Is this something that's going to help, identify who I am? Is this going to cause a discussion that is impactful and important? Or is it something that could cause people to go, ooh, I don't know if anyway, just something to think about as you grow older and have more of an online presence, something to be mindful of. So anyway, there are limits to freedom of speech. We think I can say whatever I want to. Technically, you can't. The government has placed, the courts have placed a few limitations on that. Can I threaten the life of the president? No. The Secret Service is going to show up at my door if I post a Facebook post that says, like, I want to kill the president. That's not okay. Now, you can say, I hate the president. I think the president is an idiot. I don't like the... That's okay. You can dislike people. And try, as I'm sure you're aware, people do that with our governors, with our mayors, with our presidents, with our representatives. People are quite open in their opinions, and they're allowed to do that. When you say, I want to hurt them, I want them to die, that is a line that is crossed that's not supposed to be. So that is a limit. The famous rule is you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. If you think it'd be funny if there's a bunch of people in a movie and you're like, fire, people are going to panic and they're going to run. And what if somebody trips and falls and gets stepped on and they get suffocated and they die? You could be charged with murder because there was no fire. You just thought it was a dumb prank, but somebody got hurt and died because of your stupidity. That is a limit on freedom of speech. So there are numerous limits on freedom of speech. In general, you can say what you want, but there are some limits. I make this comparison to Daoism. You can do whatever you want to try to find your way of nature, what makes you happy, with limits. You cannot hurt others. So I'll give you a quick example. If the thing that makes me happiest in life is to punch people in the face, like that half second when their pupils dilate as they see this hardened piece of American steel coming right at their zygomatic arch. That's your cheekbone, if you didn't know what that means. Ugh, that's what makes me feel most alive. Okay, number one, that's kind of scary. Number two, unless they like getting punched in the face, that's not okay, because most people probably don't want to get punched in the face, especially with this hardened piece of steel. All right? So that is a limit. I might love to punch people in the face, but I shouldn't because it hurts others. A Taoist would say, if you want to smoke cigarettes, you go ahead. There's lots of evidence how damaging that is for you, and that's a horrible thing, and you shouldn't do it. Versus when my grandparents were smokers, they were like, hey, it's great for you. And then we started to find out about 30 years ago that was not true. And having had a grandpa who died of lung cancer, trust me, I can verify that for you. Okay? But they didn't know as much as we know. But a Taoist would say, look, if you want to hurt yourself in that way, that's your choice. We all make choices. A Taoist would say, though, if you want to smoke in a car with a friend who doesn't want to smell that smoke and breathe it into their lungs, then you shouldn't smoke when they're with you out of respect to them. So you want to smoke by yourself or in your house and not cause harm to anyone else, Taoist would say that's probably a bad choice, but your call. You want to smoke in a car in an enclosed space with others that they could be harmed and they don't have a say in the matter, that's bad because you're hurting others against their will. Does that make sense? So that's a distinction. If you would like, that would be a good example to write down. I see a lot of you looking at me and nodding. Cool. Are you going to remember this months from now? Probably not. So that's something to type up or write down real quick. Okay, as an example of what is okay and what is not okay. All right. Does that make sense? Does anybody have a follow-up question or any sort of clarification needed? We're good? Okay, so I can do what I want as long as I don't hurt other people. So according to Taoist belief, if you're like, family, school's not for me. I don't want to do it anymore. I don't really like it. I want to be a carny ride operator. I want to travel around the country and operate pretty janky rides and, guess people's weight, or operate a place where people shoot basketballs at a hoop that's slightly too small and give them the hope of giving a large stuffed animal. That's your dream, and that's what you want to do. A Taoist would say, okay, if that's your dream, you follow it and you do the best version of carny ride operator that you can be. Now, I have some students I think that are Taoist. I don't know a lot of your parents that would be Taoist. A lot of your family members that would be Taoist. Because I imagine if you went right now to someone in your family and said, hey, this is what I want to do, I doubt most of them will be cool with that. True? True. Okay. So it's about you doing what's best for you as long as it doesn't harm others. And you try to do so in accordance and harmony and balance with nature and the world around us. Okay. That's the essence of Taoism. No afterlife it talks about. No, why am I here? We don't get in all that. It's like, here's what I got. Excuse me. How do I live the best life I can while I'm here? Okay, so that's Taoism pretty much. It's chill, it's relaxed, it's way less rules oriented than Confucianism. Confucianism is listen to your old folks, they always know what's right, blah, 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 blah. Taoism is just relax, man. Just like live, bro. Live. Are we good? Okay. All right. Now we're going to switch to Christianity. Christianity is the world's most popular religion. About 2 billion people are Christians in the world today. Can anybody chime in quickly with a major belief of Christianity? What is something that Christians would believe?
There's only one God.
Okay, so we are monotheistic. Excellent.
Jesus was God's son.
Okay, so the divinity of Jesus. Correct. In fact, Jesus Christ would be the namesake of the faith. That's pretty good. One or two more. Something else that's like big picture Christianity. No matter what kind of Christian you are, you're going to believe this.
Heaven and hell.
Okay, there's eternal punishment or reward for actions here on earth. Correct. Good. All right, so there is an eternity, and you will be judged after you die based on your performance in life. Okay, good. One more.
10 Commandments.
Okay, so 10 Commandments is good. Yeah, so basic rules of life. Excellent. One other thing I will write down that tends to be pretty signature Christian belief is the concept of a Trinity. And this is something that if you are Christian and have been raised Christian, it just makes sense to you. You've heard it your entire life. Of course it is. If you are not Christian, often you hear this and go, what? And oftentimes my Christian students get frustrated because to them it's just so basic, and everyone else who's not raised a Christian is kind of like, because it's difficult to explain, frankly, in many ways, because I've had Christian kids try to start explaining it and they realize as they're explaining it, they're not doing a very good job. And I'm not saying that means it's a good or bad belief. I'm just saying it's a unique characteristic of Christianity because Jews do not believe in a Trinity, neither do Muslims. So of those three religions, which are closely related in many ways, this is a unique Christian belief. So the Trinity is that God has three aspects to him, okay? God the Father, Jesus the Son, and then the Holy Spirit, all right? In Latin, in nomine patria filia spiritus sancti, all right? So and then some people will say, well, does that mean there's three gods? No, clearly monotheistic, but just different aspects to God. Jesus, it is believed, came to earth, lived as a human. There's lots of historical evidence of Jesus as a human living on this planet. So, different people of different religious backgrounds can debate the religious nature of Jesus, but there is plenty of evidence that Jesus Christ or Jesus of Nazareth was a human who walked on the planet and, interacted with others and all that kind of stuff. There's quite a bit of evidence from the Bible, but also outside of the Bible, quite a bit of evidence of his existence, 2,000-ish years ago. So, and then of course the Holy Spirit, which is believed to be the representation of God to followers of the faith today on the planet. All right. So here's the interesting thing about Christianity. It was one of many small faiths that were around in this time period. There's a lot of religious experimentation. The Roman Empire generally supported flexibility with religion. And the Christian faith is born as part of the Roman Empire. Okay. As I'm sure some of you may know, that it is based off of the beliefs of Judaism. Christians, their book is called the Bible. And the first half of that book is called the Old Testament. And that scripture is also used by people of the Jewish faith. When you get to the New Testament, as it is called, and you get to the divinity of Jesus and his resurrection, he died for the sins of humanity, all that good stuff, that is something that Jews would not believe. Also, Muslims, which we'll get to in a few minutes, okay, when we talk about the similarities and differences between these three religions. So the concept is that Jesus is a Messiah or Savior. Jesus came to earth, lived for approximately 33 years, was killed for his leadership and beliefs, and then 3 days later rose again and went up to heaven. Okay, and then we'll come back at some point to mark the end of time, and there's a lot of different beliefs about what that might be, depending on your belief of a couple of scriptures here and there in the Bible. But the concept of Messiah or Savior is something that other religions also possess. The Jewish faith believes in a Messiah, but that person has yet to come. And so the Messiah someday will come, but has not done so yet. So they do not recognize Jesus as a Messiah in the Jewish faith. And so if you're a Christian, you believe that you and Jewish people have a lot in common, a lot of common beliefs. You mentioned the 10 Commandments. That, of course, is a belief that those two faiths would have in common. But Jews made a mistake by not recognizing the divinity of Jesus. That's probably the fundamental difference between those two religions. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? So yeah, go ahead.
The Trinity, are they all one person or like?
Yeah, yes, basically, but with three aspects to it. It's somewhat similar to in Hinduism, that the gods have different versions called avatars, a word some of us are more familiar with because of a movie a couple years ago. That's what that means. So yeah, basically. And yes, Sarah, your question is indicative of, again, just kind of trying to understand that concept. And that is why sometimes, again, kids that have grown up as Christians and are well-versed in Christian belief are just, of course, that's the way it is. And they don't understand why other people don't understand it. Well, that is how all of us feel when we learn something new for the first time, that we are, if we haven't grown up with it and it's not part of our heritage and our culture, we hear it and go, what? And so it's just kind of interesting to be exposed to what it's like to hear something and not quite understand it. That's a really interesting part of learning. And I think that's fun. Also, of course, many of us, if we are people of faith and we attend a religious service, we learn about our faith in that religious service. We don't learn about the history of it. And so I have learned over the years that many of my students may know the tenets of their faith and their beliefs, but when we start discussing the history of that faith, where it came from, how those beliefs developed, they often know none of that because that is not something a lot of religions teach their followers, is the history of it. So as I always say, I'm not preaching, I'm teaching. So that's the fundamental difference, of course, with what I'm doing here. So let's go back to the Romans for a second. If we had a normal school setting, we would spend a day or so in the Romans because they're one of the ancient world's most important empires. They're the third biggest empire of all time. They have a remarkable impact on the culture of the Middle East, North Africa, Europe, etc. But we don't have that time, so we're just going to kind of skip them, unfortunately, but it's not part of our curriculum, so that's how it goes. But what I do want to mention is, as you may know, the Romans conquered huge amounts of land, and they were fairly tolerant rulers. Their main purpose for conquering different cultures was to get their money. You paid a tax, you paid a price for being under Roman control, but they would build their road system to you and you would start having trade with the Roman Empire, and so you made a lot more money. They would oftentimes make sure you were properly fed and that you had enough access to food, so there was not famine often in the Roman Empire. They would often build you arenas and different coliseums for entertainment purposes, amphitheaters, so you would be entertained by their gladiator games and their plays and that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of benefit to being under Roman control. What they asked was that you, to show your loyalty, would take on some of their culture. An example is in religion. If you had 10 gods you worshiped, add 3 Roman gods to that, and then we'll call that cool because you're mixing your culture with the Romans. And that's what they asked. And if you did that, they let you continue to worship your own gods as well. Of course, if I'm a monotheist, if I'm a Jew, if I'm a Christian, am I going to be okay with mixing and matching my religious leadership with Roman? No, because mono means how many? 1. So I'm not cool with 2 gods. I'm not cool with 12 gods. 2 and 12 are the same. They're all bad. So I'm not going to accept Roman gods. And the Romans get mad because in their mind, what's a couple more gods? Who cares? And so therefore Christians and Jews will be persecuted and treated pretty horribly, as I'm sure many of you are aware, by the Roman Empire for hundreds of years. Okay? All this changes, and this guy is in your study guide. And I'll tell you right now, when I give you the study guides starting next week for period 1, you will notice that there are not a whole lot of names in your study guide. There are very, very few. A lot of empires, a lot of concepts, very few names you need to know. This is one of the few names that is mentioned in your study guide. His name is Constantine. Constantine. Constantine was a Roman emperor who lived in the 4th century CE, so the 300s. Okay? And the story goes, he's fighting a battle. He's taking the L. He looks up in the sky, sees a cross, tells his guys to put that on their armor, on their helmets and whatnot. Whether that's true or not, we don't know, but that's what he said. They end up winning the battle. He's like, well, this Christianity thing might be pretty good. So he decides to legalize Christianity in the Roman Empire. Let me be very clear. Christianity would not be the world's most populous religion today if it had not been legalized by the Roman Empire. That has a massive impact on the spreading of the Christian faith. Massive. Because the Romans control an enormous empire, the largest of its day. And as the religion is legalized, it starts to spread and become more popular. And in fact, when the Roman Empire dies in the 5th century, about 200 years later after Constantine, the religion lives. And many other small religions go away. They aren't as popular. They don't get the followers. And eventually, after Constantine's death, Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire, replacing their polytheistic religion, Jupiter and all that stuff. And which is why today, nobody after school today or nobody on Sunday is going to go worship at the temple of Jupiter. That religion loses its power and influence. Christianity takes its place. Okay? And so Roman legalization may be the most important event in Christian history outside of the founding of the faith itself. Okay? Everybody needs to understand that. No Roman legalization, no 2 billion Christians, not even close. Not even close. All right? Everybody understand? Everybody good with that? So therefore, is Christianity universalizing or ethnic?
Universalizing.
Absolutely. It's going to spread easily. Because you don't get to be the world's most popular religion without spreading easily. All right? Good. Now, last thing. And of course, we could spend months on Christianity. We're spending 20 minutes because that's what we do in pretty much anything. We're getting ready to spend 20 minutes on Islam, the world's second most popular religion. All right? There are 3 major branches of Christianity. I don't need you to necessarily memorize them, but I'll point out a couple of things real quick. Of course, we have the Catholic Church. We have the Orthodox churches, plural. And we have what are called Protestants. If you go to Wikipedia and look up the history of the Catholic Church, the leader of the church is called the Pope. If you look at who are the popes? The first pope, according to Catholic tradition, St. Peter, one of the apostles of Jesus, who followed him around and was a close companion of Jesus. He is considered the first pope. There is a verse in the book of Matthew where Jesus looks at Peter and says, "Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." And so Peter is considered to be the first pope, the leader of the church after Jesus' death. All right? And that's actually a pun because Peter, Petra in Greek, means rock. He called him a rock. His name literally means rock. Hilarious. So that is, and yes, that's actually a pun. There are puns in the Bible. Who knew? All right? So he is the leader of that church. And that is the main branch of Christianity then. It's the main branch of Christianity now. Over half of the world's Christians are Catholic. Now, Catholicism is not the majority Christian version in the United States. That would be the Protestant sects. But Louisville has a very high Catholic population. You know, we got a lot of fish fries in the spring. We got a lot of Catholic schools, as I'm sure you're aware of. That is because Louisville is the first city west of the Allegheny Mountains in the United States to get a diocese or a headquarters of the Catholic Church. So outside of the original 13 colonies, the first place there are major Catholic, there's a Catholic organization is right here in Louisville, which is why to this day, 250 years later, we have so many Catholics and Catholic churches and Catholic schools. Longstanding Catholic tradition here in Louisville. Okay? About 1,000 years ago, right before we start our period 1 content in the year 1054, the church splits up into what's called the Orthodox group. Orthodox means original. Some people believe the Catholic Church has made changes that they don't agree with. And without getting into too much detail, I mentioned earlier the Pope. There is a singular Pope. The Pope is believed to be God's chosen messenger for his people, and he gets to make decisions. Also, all Catholic services for over 1,000 years are held in Latin. What if I don't speak Latin? Doesn't matter. You go to church anyway. There are some that believe we should have more local control and that we should have services held and the Bible translated into local languages. So if you're in Russia, it should be in Russian. If you're in, I don't know, Estonia, it should be Estonian, that kind of thing. And so these divisions get stronger and stronger until about 1,000 years ago, they split up. And so most Western Europeans will remain Catholic. Many Eastern European societies will become Orthodox. And so, for example, in Louisville, there is a beautiful Greek Orthodox church on Breckenridge Lane. There's one across the street from Eat at Joe's, the restaurant and bar, like 5 minutes from here. Those Orthodox traditions still remain, but today it is the third of the major denominations of Christianity in terms of population. The biggest split of Christianity is going to occur about 500 years ago. We will talk about it in class later on, so I'll give you a very brief overview. New churches are formed in protest, henceforth the term Protestant. Most Christian denominations you can think of are Protestant: Baptist, Methodist, Episcopalian, Presbyterian. Non-denominational Christians like Southeast or Northeast Christian here in Louisville. Those are all Protestant churches. And so in the United States, Protestantism is the biggest denomination. In the world, it's the second. About 600 million people are estimated to be Protestants around the world versus over 1 billion Catholics. Okay? So Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant. We will especially talk about the split between the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches later on in time period 2. Okay? So that's the broad strokes of Christianity. We good with that? All right, lastly, for the final 20 minutes, let's move over and talk about Islam for a few minutes. Again, Islam is a religion that is the world's second most popular in terms of number of followers. It is also a religion that is based on the principles of Christianity and Judaism. So let me be very, very clear. According to Islamic tradition, Muslims worship the same God as Christians and Jews. That is something many people don't know, but it is true. God, whoops, I can't spell, that's too many L's, sorry, is named Allah, or Allah if you're anglicizing it. Shoot, there we go. That just means God. That's not a different God or a special God. It just means God in Arabic, much like Yahweh means God in Hebrew. Okay? Now, others may not believe that, but if you're a Muslim, you believe you are worshiping the same God as Jews and Christians. Let me put it very clearly for you, because so many of us has never thought about this. Muslims look at Christians the way Christians look at Jews. Same background, similar, using a lot of the same text, a lot of the same stories and heroes of those stories, prophets, beliefs. But Muslims believe Christians messed up when they accepted that Jesus is a Messiah. Because for the majority of Muslims, and again, there are many different kinds of Muslims, just like there are many different kinds of Christians or Jews or, Buddhists or Hindus. For most Muslims, there is no Messiah. There is no Trinity. There is just God. As the Shahada or Statement of Faith says, there is one God, and Muhammad is his prophet. So we'll talk about Muhammad in just a second, but he is not the Islamic Jesus. I've heard kids actually say that before. No. Jesus is Jesus in Islam. He is mentioned in the Quran quite often. His name in Arabic is Issa, I-S-S-A. But he is not a divine figure. He did not descend from heaven. He was not resurrected. He is not the Messiah, but he did live, and he was a prophet of the true faith. Okay? Many people don't know that stuff because they just never learn those things. Again, you often learn the belief you have in your religious entity, but you don't learn about the history or its connection to other faiths, which is totally understandable. I get that. So, one God, obviously monotheistic, clearly important. There is an afterlife. There's heaven and hell, but not those terms necessarily, but there is an eternal punishment or reward. Okay, very similar to that. They believe in many of the same scriptures. Who are the great prophets of Islam? Noah, Moses, Elijah, Abraham, Jesus, the Virgin Mary, Jesus' mother, Maryam or Maryam in Arabic. Her name is written more in the Quran, the Holy Scripture of Islam, than it is in the Bible. So again, many of the same people, beliefs, structures. The fundamental difference is that there is no Messiah, and Jesus certainly would not be that person anyway. Okay, that's the fundamental difference. I got time, I'll give you a brief story to explain some of the commonalities but differences. Abraham is a founding father in all of these faiths. Okay, in fact, sometimes we call Christianity, Judaism, and Islam Abrahamic religions. The brief version, if you are unfamiliar, or even if you are, Abraham is told by God that he will be a great leader of the Jewish people, and he will have the descendants as numerous as the sands on the sea. So, sands on the beach, basically. A lot of offspring. But he and his wife have been unable to conceive a child. They are both very old. Sarah, is in her 90s. Now, at that time, you had so few people, it was very important to have children. Abraham was a large landowner, a very important figure. He had servants. At that time, it was culturally acceptable, if you could not have a child with your wife, that you could have one with one of your servants, because you needed to have kids. There weren't a whole lot of people around. So he has a son with his servant Hagar. And we'll come back to Hagar in a minute. She is mentioned in the Bible, and their son Ishmael is mentioned in the Bible. Okay? Then a miracle happens in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and Sarah gets pregnant in her 90s. That's why it's a miracle. It's not something that would traditionally happen. They have the child. The child is named Isaac. And again, you don't need to memorize this. I'm just trying to tell you the story so you understand some of these common traditions. And in the Jewish faith at that time, you had to sacrifice animals to God. And so Abraham is told that he should make a sacrifice, but he's told it should be a son. That's a tough one. But he's a dutiful servant. He's going to do it. So he tells his son, all right, we're going to go sacrifice. And they get closer to the place, and he's like, hey, Dad, where's the sheep? Where's the lamb? And he's like, tough news, son. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. And so the son is tied down. Abraham's got his knife. He's going to kill his own son because he believes that's what God wants him to do. And then in the Judeo-Christian tradition, an angel shows up and says, stop. We wanted to test your faith. Clearly, you have faith in God and will do what he says. We would not ask you to kill your own son. Of course not. And then Isaac grows up to have his children of his own, the twins Jacob and Esau. Their children lead to the 12 tribes of Israel, which is the basis of Jewish history and culture. Through that line, you eventually get great figures like King Solomon, King David, and eventually Jesus himself. So skipping a lot of ways, you eventually get down to Jesus. That same story exists in the religion of Islam, but instead of it almost being Isaac that is killed, it is his son Ishmael, who he had with his servant Hagar. Ishmael is spared at the last minute. Ishmael grows up. Ishmael has children of his own. Lineage. Eventually we get to Muhammad. Will be from that lineage. So same story, different versions of it, depending on your religious tradition. On the right, Isaac and Jesus, we see the Judeo-Christian tradition. On the left, we have Ishmael eventually leading to Muhammad, the Islamic tradition. So these faiths have so much in common. So much in common. Okay? Often that we don't even realize. All right, let's talk for a minute about who Muhammad is. And then we'll end with some basic beliefs and we'll call it a day. Okay? So Muhammad is called in the Islamic faith the seal of the prophets. Now you can spell Muhammad a bunch of different ways, by the way. Sometimes you'll see it M-U, because again, Arabic has a different alphabet than Western languages, so the sounds are different. The spellings can be different. Muhammad is the world's most popular first name. Fun fact. More kids named Muhammad than anybody else, and more adults too, obviously, because adults still have names. So Muhammad is called the seal of the prophets. That doesn't mean seal like in a zoo. No, it means seal as in like you close something. So rule number one, Muhammad is the last prophet of Islam. He gets the full version of the true religion. Okay, so a couple years ago, there's this dude in Iraq who creates a group that's called ISIS. They're terrorists. They're bad dudes. He stands up and says, I am a prophet. At that point, 99% of Muslims are like, nope. Because Islam is very clear. Muhammad is the last one. Nobody else is going to be a prophet. If they claim to be a prophet after Muhammad, they're lying. Okay? So from the very beginning, most people are going to be like, no, dude, wrong. Nope. All right? No. people often can use religion to justify their actions that are pretty bad. And that's true of all faiths at all times. People would like to make excuses for their behavior, and sometimes religion is part of that process. And I would certainly say that guy is definitely an example of that. All right, so Muhammad is going to grow up in a city called Mecca. You may have heard of Mecca before. You definitely should have after your reading the last couple nights. And Mecca is in today what is called Saudi Arabia. It's in the desert. It's surrounded by a pretty bleak landscape. So it's a trade city. If you come to Mecca, you're going to stop for a while because you may not have actually slept in a bed or had good food in a while. So it's a place you often stayed a few days before you continue on your journey. Because of that, Mecca is a city that is pretty modern for its day. You're going to be exposed to a lot of different religions and beliefs and ideas. So Muhammad grows up basically in a fairly decent sized city. And so he's going to be exposed to a lot of different cultures and backgrounds and ideas. He is orphaned as a young man. He's raised by his uncle. But he's always considered like a good dude, like respectful, that kind of thing. And when he's in his 20s, he marries an older woman who is a widow who has some money. And so he's not Buddha rich, but he's living a comfortable lifestyle. And so the story goes, though, he's kind of a seeker. He is always asking questions, wanting to know more, and why this, why that. Mecca is a city that sits in a valley, so it's surrounded by hills and mountains. And so Muhammad evidently likes to go for walks at night. He likes to walk through the hills, walks through the caves. It's like his after dinner kind of ritual. And one day in the year 610, so approximately at 40 years of age, he is visited by the angel Gabriel. Gabriel is also mentioned in the Bible quite frequently in the Judeo-Christian tradition. And Gabriel says, Quran, which means recite. Like, I'm going to tell you this stuff. You go tell people. Muhammad was illiterate. Muhammad did not write down any of his sermons. His sermons are written down by his followers and later collated into the Quran. Just like the New Testament is not written by Jesus, but by the followers of Jesus. Similar things. Buddha didn't write down his sermons. Confucius did not write down the Analects. His followers did, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so very similar in that way. And basically, he's going to tell the story of Islam. There's one true faith, monotheism. You know, here are the rules we follow, blah, 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 blah. In Islam, we have what's called the 5 pillars. I don't need you to memorize them, just like I don't need you to memorize the 10 commandments or the 4 noble truths. But basically, there's one God. You have to give to charity. You should pray 5 times a day. Once in your life, if you have the means and the health, you should travel to Mecca and do the pilgrimage called the Hajj, which is something you may be familiar with. If I have a minute, I'll show you a very brief clip of that. If not, oh well. This is very intriguing to many of us because you can only go to Mecca if you are a Muslim. Non-Muslims are not allowed in the holiest city of the faith. And if we are told we can't do something, many of us are like, ooh, I want to do that. But you cannot enter unless you are certified as a Muslim. You have like documents from a mosque, etc. Okay? Mosque is the holy place of Islam, a place of worship. So the 5 pillars are the essence of the belief. Mecca at that time had a lot of polytheistic idols. People would come and worship a calf or a statue of a camel or whatever. And so this bothered Muhammad greatly, and he tried to get that stopped. And of course, people think he's nuts. They think he's lost his mind. Most of the people in Mecca know him. He's grown up there. They think he's goofy. So finally, this is getting bad for business. People are complaining. They're trying to go worship their favorite idol, and this dude is yelling at them and telling them they're going to go to a place called hell, and he doesn't know what that is. Eternal damnation, whatnot. Okay? So he is told he has to leave. He's kicked out of his city. And if he comes back, he'll be killed. So he literally has a death sentence on his head. But he does not waver. He does not say, well, I better give up because I might get punished. So he leaves Mecca with his followers, which after 12 years of trying to spread his faith are less than 100 people. Very small. He goes about 100 miles away to another city called Medina. Medina today is the 2nd city of Islam. That is where the first mosque is built. He gets thousands of followers there. A lot of people like what he has to say, and he will build up a pretty strong base to his religion. A few years later, long story short, he decides to go back to Mecca. God has told him he should go back to his hometown and conquer it and make it a center of Islam, and he does just that. Switching my screen very briefly. I'm going to stop sharing on this device and switch the other. In downtown Mecca, there is a structure called the Kaaba. It is a room that has nothing in it. It's about 50 feet tall. But it is believed to have been built by Adam and Eve And then it was destroyed in the Great Flood and rebuilt by Abraham. So it is old, 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 old. And when Muhammad gets to the Kaaba, there we go, he goes to that structure, and he is going to, let me find the right picture. Here we go. Oops, I have to share it. Silly me, sorry. You think I know how to do this after a while. So that small black building where my cursor is, that's the Kaaba. In the background is one of the world's largest hotels, which just opened up a couple years ago. So you see it here inside of the center mosque there in Mecca. There it is right there. And so it is the center of Islamic worship because Muhammad goes there and destroys all the false idols and declares this is the city of the one true God. So Muslims do not pray to the Kaaba. They don't believe it answers their prayers or gives them guidance. No, no, no. The Kaaba is a symbol of God's victory over false religions. And so it is a symbol of the greatness of their God. So you pray toward it because you believe it is respectful and showing, you know, your allegiance is always toward God. So when you pray 5 times a day, you pray towards Mecca, specifically towards the Kaaba. For many years in the Islamic world, if you were in a hotel room, there would be special markings on the wall to let you know. Now, of course, you can just use an app, and it's pretty easy to know where Mecca is and where you should pray towards. So you're not praying to, you're praying toward, if that you understand the difference. Okay? So it is one of the world's great holy sites. If you go on your pilgrimage, you circle around it 7 times, which 7 is a number that's often found in Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition. As being a complete number for various activities. So that is something that you see, that Kaaba, okay, the center of Islamic worship there in Mecca. All right? So we have just a couple minutes left, a few other things. I'm going to go back to the whiteboard. So Muhammad, just a couple years later, dies. After conquering Mecca, making Islam a popular religion in his home area, he dies. He does not name a successor. He did not say, you will take over when I die. Versus, we just mentioned that in the biblical tradition, in the Catholic tradition, Jesus looks at St. Peter and says, you're taking over when I'm gone. And so, of course, people are going to fight over it. And so we end up with the 2 major groups of Islam out of this conflict in the early days after Muhammad's passing. And they are Sunni and Shia. The Sunni are the majority. About 85% of Muslims today in the world are Sunni. The Shia are the minority. They lose the conflict. Without getting into any detail, because we only got 5 minutes, the fight is over who could be the ruler. The Sunnis believe anyone who's a Muslim should be able to be the ruler because we're all the same if we're Muslims. Islam is an egalitarian faith. All followers are equal. Islam also universalizing, definitely tries to spread. We'll talk about religion spreading in period 1, because that's a pattern we're going to see definitely. The Shia believe that the only people that should be the leaders of Islam are those who are related to Muhammad by blood, like a traditional kingdom. You're the next king because your dad was the king, that kind of thing. And so the Sunni end up winning this conflict. And so the Shia to this day are a minority. The biggest country in the world with a majority Shia population is Iran, but it is in a small minority of Islamic countries. The vast majority of Muslims are Sunni. Now today, if I were to go to a Sunni mosque and a Shia mosque, there are religious differences. But the split did not happen because of religion. It happened because of politics. Who would take over as the next ruler? That's the source of the conflict, which is definitely a conflict we still see to this day. Okay? So that is the basic big picture items there in terms of Islamic belief. Does that make sense? So as you will see in your short answers, one of your questions, I've given you 2 choices. You pick one. I've asked you to compare and contrast different religions and philosophies. So before you sit down and try to do these short answers without your notes, one of the things you want to do is look at your notes for these major, we've done, you know, Hinduism and Buddhism. Those are both Indian religions, so it seems kind of similar. We talked about Confucianism and Daoism, both Chinese philosophies, kind of similar. We talked about Christianity and Islam, a lot of similarities there. But think about what are similarities, what are also some differences. And if you can do that, that question will be pretty simple. So if you want to plan ahead and think about it a little bit, now if you end up using your notes, I probably won't even know. But again, you're going to get a full grade. You're going to get complete credit if you turn it in even if it's terrible. So in my opinion, the better thing for you to do would be honest and try to do it without notes and see where you are. Okay, looking in the mirror sometimes isn't fun, but it's how we look in the mirror that we change things we don't like and try to do better in terms of our own performance. Okay, so I encourage you to be honest with it, because I will always reward you grade-wise if you do what I ask. Remember, I've told you several times already, I decide how many assignments we have. I decide how I grade them. If you guys are showing up and doing what I ask, and I appreciate it. I know it's hard to sit there for an hour while I go over stuff. I know it's difficult, but sometimes I just got to do it because we got so much to cover and so little time to do it. And we get to bother Sarah when she's out of town next week and use the support session. So that's just how that goes. But I appreciate your all's commitment to being here and doing this. I really do. And eventually we'll get back together in person and it'll be a lot easier, and we'll get time to cover and do some more fun and interactive things. But at this point, it's going to be limited in that way. I'll put you in breakout rooms when I can, but for the most part, we just have to deal with it as best we can. And I know that's not easy, but AP's never easy. This is just a different kind of not easy, if you will. So I'm very proud of you guys halfway through the first 6 weeks. I'm pleased with what I'm seeing. I'm pleased with your efforts. I still need to grade a lot of things, and I'm working on it. I'm teaching a brand new course this year in AP Research. So to be honest, right now, that's taking a lot of my time, more time than I thought it would. So I know I'm behind on grading. I appreciate your patience. Nobody's complained yet. You probably should start, but I will catch up on grading as soon as I can, I promise. Okay? All right, I'm done unless anybody has any questions. Y'all have a great weekend. If you need something, let me know, but I will see you on